Merci beaucoup. Donc, je disais que je vais poser la première question honorable qui est la suivante. On vient d'écouter en fait une présentation un peu sur la situation d'endettement dans les États fragiles ou les États en transition, pour être politiquement, peut-être utiliser les termes que la banque utilise actuellement. Donc la question est la suivante. Comment les États en transition peuvent-ils renforcer leur structure de gouvernance et leur capacité institutionnelle à gérer efficacement la dette, à gérer les risques financiers et assurer une croissance économique durable, en particulier dans un contexte d'incertitude politique et économique. Je ne sais pas si la question est claire, sinon je peux la répéter. Comment les États en transition peuvent-ils renforcer leur structure de gouvernance et leur capacité institutionnelle à gérer efficacement la dette? Et comment ils peuvent gérer les risques financiers et assurer donc une croissance économique? Nous savons que ces pays ont effectivement beaucoup de difficultés en la matière. Donc, honorable, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question and for the invitation to participate in the workshop here. The first point I'd like to make is to internalize. It's important that we internalize technical assistance because apart from the transition states, many have heard me speak about the transition, those who are also transitioning to middle income. And both of them face the same, issues. And why I say we should internalize technical assistance is that later when I make the presentation, you will see that even our laws are now incorporating some of what Mr. Parelli was presenting. For example, if you take the Public Financial Management Act, we have the criteria that is set, debt management office, setting up a debt management office, in the law. You do have fiscal indicators, including revenue, expenditure to GDP, deficits, ratios in the law. We do have criteria in some of the laws for fiscal strategy documents which must go to cabinet and for which cabinets must be binding and going to parliament. I think what the countries need to do is to begin to support this with budget resources, allocation of budget resources. Because many of our countries have gone through technical assistance for the last 30, 40 years. And I'm talking about the ERP SAP era, which continues. And often you meet senior people in revenue administration, senior people in debt management, controller, treasury, central banks, and they have been all this period in reforms and have received technical assistance and have documented and are often the ones who make presentations, they attend courses. So the first requirement is budget support. The second requirement is, incidentally, many of these institutions have training academies. And therefore, I would also advocate that for the purpose of those who are coming up, in order that they don't also wait for technical assistance. And this is something that we want to recommend also. How about a curriculum? How about the syllabus for the training institutions? So that you have entry-level curriculum. When you rise to a supervisor, you have a curriculum. And then when you rise to management, that's when if you are in a revenue agency or you are in, let's say, the controller or treasury, you need to start understanding policy, fiscal policy, what goes into budgeting, right? And there you will see the role of revenue, you see the role of expenditure in debt, because after all, debt is a product of revenue minus expenditure. How do we manage arrears? So in short, I think internalizing both resources, capacity for technical assistance developed from within, maybe in conjunction with our universities, economics departments, as well as, business schools, to take up the mantle, and then periodically, we will build the capacity internally to begin to handle, some of these issues. Yeah.
Okay. Now, thank you very much for the response. Maybe let me just add one is, for your perspective, what development partner can do differently? So as we say, it's more than 20 years we are supporting debt management office, we are supporting country, but the progress is still, can say low. What the development partner can do differently to try to improve the performance of debt management in our transition state?
Once again, Africa is being stratified. When I make my presentation, I will show. But Africa is often taken as comprehensively lacking capacity. And even for some countries, I remember doing technical assistance to Sierra Leone and the rest, sometimes fragility comes with either, COVID, with SARS, with global financial crisis. So it's more of a setback than the country, remaining fragile, wars, right? So it means that even for fragile countries, there are people who have the capacity, who have benefited from technical assistance. I believe the role of the multilateral agencies that gave us our country's capacity should begin to also stratify the capacity to recognize that, countries like, Kenya, Ghana, and others, Nigeria, which have received capacity, can be, through their institutions, be able to deliver, technical assistance. Because often the beneficiaries of technical assistance are attracted by even some of these multilateral institutions, African Development Bank, World Bank, IMF. I worked in the IMF for a decade. So why wouldn't these countries, working with the advanced countries, have a stratified, so that within, say, ECOWAS, within our regional groupings, we can build. So it shouldn't be about just preparation of budgets and having a forum to discuss, but it should be about capacity building. And I believe that if you have, experienced hands like many in the regional institutions, the budget institutions and the rest, and I know there's a lot of collaboration through the PFMA, we met capacity from within the continent. So we should stratify the capacity so that those who are becoming lower middle income, upper middle income, and of course we have only one high income country by the World Bank classification, would build their own capacity, advance, and not be so much recipients of technical assistance as enhancing their technical assistance, and then they can also continue to deliver. And you see this in other places where Brazil and others deliver technical assistance, sometimes even to our countries. So I think that's what I want to propose, that we look at the structure of the continent, and measure the capacity building according to the capacity within the country, in order that we are not repeating the same technical assistance which is basic. So the internalization I spoke about and the stratification, including African institutions leading a continuous, effort, including the evaluation, the evaluation, PEFA, TADAT, and all those things. We should be able to run this, with African Development Bank leading. Of course, there's collaboration with the World Bank, and the IMF and others who develop these tools. If we develop it, I believe African Development Bank can be in the lead in doing some of this evaluation on a more continuous basis.
Okay. Non, merci beaucoup pour la réponse compréhensive qui était très claire. je pense, des mots-clés comme l'internalisation donc, de l'assistance technique. Bon, il est clair que la question de l'ownership est toujours importante en matière de renforcement des capacités, donc la disponibilité, l'allocation des ressources. Merci beaucoup. Je vais peut-être maintenant passer à M. Pradeli, qui vient de nous faire une excellente présentation donc, sur un peu la situation de la dette dans les États en transition. Je voudrais vous poser la question suivante. En explorant la dynamique de la dette dans les États en transition, comment la gestion de la dette publique diffère-t-elle dans les États en transition par rapport aux autres États? Donc la question est la suivante. En explorant la dynamique de la dette dans les États en transition, comment la gestion de la dette publique diffère-t-elle dans les États en transition par rapport aux États qu'on peut considérer comme étant des États qui sont en situation de développement un peu plus élevée? En particulier, quels sont les défis et les opportunités uniques à ces États? Merci beaucoup. Over to you.
Thank you. Well, I think there are two important dimensions in which the debt management for transition states is particularly important. First, as I emphasized in my presentation, transition states are either having problems to service government debt, or they are highly likely to experience difficulties in the upcoming years. So debt sustainability should be preserving debt sustainability should be an explicit objective for debt management in transition states. The second aspect is, as I also mentioned in the presentation, the composition of the sources of financing for transition states remains dependent on multilateral, bilateral, and traditional private sector creditors. There are very few cases of transition states in which one can have more advanced market-based or regular debt bonds or securities being issued. And the credit funding from multilaterals, bilaterals, and traditional private sector creditors like commercial banks is peculiar in itself, because it tends to be associated to capital projects, and the financing terms are often restricted. There is not too much degree of freedom for the governments, for the borrowing countries, to negotiate those terms. So I think that these two would be the factors that make debt management peculiar and very important in transition states. Deeper into debt sustainability, if I may, I would like to expand on a concept that the presenter introduced at the beginning, the difference between good debt and bad debt. If I am asked to provide a more accurate definition, I would say that the good debt is the debt that creates its own repayment capacity. That is, the good debt is like a family that has children and love the children, educate the children, and many years down the road, the children become adults, the parents enter the old age, and the children, now adults, can support their parents in the remaining part of their lives. Also, those children, now adults, will have their own children, and these children will support them in due time. So good debt is the debt that creates repayment capacity. Now, what do we mean by repayment capacity? Traditionally, when we look at debt sustainability from the perspective of a single debt transaction, like a loan, we tend to think that repayment capacity refers to the generation of revenues, the revenue mobilization, that allows the government to have resources to repay debt. This is true, and in fact, the mobilization of revenues, taxes, fees, charges, is an important challenge for transition states in order to preserve that sustainability. But there is another source of funds to repay debt. It is the new debt. It is the rollover of maturing liabilities. Now, for the rollover of maturing liability to be consistent with that sustainability, it should not be a Ponzi game in which a government borrows constantly to service all debt, but instead it should be a cycle in which there is a growing demand for government debt. Usually when one is discussing debt management, the attention is placed on the government that needs the funding, but it's also important to consider that debt management, debt is like tango. You need two to tango. So you need to create demand for government debt. And the creation of government demand is precisely the precondition to have debt rollovers, to have the government able to borrow in the future to pay the maturing debt without entering into a spiral of explosive debt. Now, the creation of solid debt markets with a robust demand for government securities is at the core of the development of domestic debt markets, which, together with the mobilization of resources, are, in my view, the two ways in which debt sustainability can be preserved, if not lost, or restored, if lost. Thank you.
Non, merci beaucoup pour ces éléments en fait d'appréciation. Je pense, comme je l'ai dit dès le début, effectivement, la question n'est pas la dette, la question c'est effectivement la qualité de la dette, la productivité de la dette. Et je suis parfaitement d'accord avec vous que les États en transition ont effectivement des difficultés pour honorer leur service de la dette, mais effectivement la question c'est de savoir pourquoi cette situation. Et donc je pense que les éléments que vous avez abordés donc, en matière donc, de qualité de la dette, de qualité à l'entrée de la dette, me semblent être des éléments très importants et j'espère que quand on passera la parole donc, à l'audience, on pourra avoir peut-être quelques éléments sur la base donc, des cas spécifiques des États. Qui sont ici représentés. Merci beaucoup, merci pour la réponse. Je vais maintenant passer à M. Crimo et ma question est la suivante. Comment des prévisions de trésorerie efficaces peuvent-elles aider les États en transition à gérer leurs obligations en matière de dette et à atteindre la stabilité financière dans un contexte d'instabilité économique? I will repeat, je pense que j'ai été un peu rapide. Comment les prévisions de trésorerie efficaces peuvent-elles aider les États en transition à gérer leurs obligations en matière de dette et à atteindre la stabilité financière dans un contexte d'incertitude économique? Over to you. If the translation is correct.
Okay. I think I understand. I think the translation is perhaps not 100% correct, but I think I understand what we need to do here, and it's all to do with cash management.
Yes.
Yeah. So and cash management, and I'm so glad we have this topic on this platform for this session, because everything starts with cash. I have a $5 here in my pocket, and for years I have been carrying this $5 in my pocket, and I feel very rich. So if you manage cash in a household, your wife and yourself, in a company or government, it's the same. You need to have cash. Cash has a real value. It's got, if my wife say to me, let's buy this, I often say to her, I don't have the money. So and that attitude, and it's not but because I don't have money, but I don't have money for that specific thing. And the same with government. If you don't have money, you can't spend that money. Corporates must have money to invest build new plants or whatever, and they can get money from borrowing. Same with government. Government needs, you have the budget, but the budget, there's no funds for the budget. It needs to be funded. And the only way that you can get funded is through tax returns or your revenue authority. And if that, and then also link it up with your borrowing. Now government's got expenditures that they need to sort of, every department's got the budget allocation, which they need to spend, but they can't spend it if they don't have the money. So where do we get the money? We need to make sure that we get the money from the revenue authorities, and then if that is not enough, we have a deficit and therefore we need to borrow. But you can't borrow, you can only borrow when you, and the trick is then, how do you link my spending to my cash requirements? How do you link that? Many African states, and I think our transitional states perhaps don't have cash management offices. And perhaps they do, but it's very isolated, and they confuse cash management with budget execution. And cash management is not budget execution. Budget execution is to make sure that I will spend my money, I will spend my budget over the term. Cash management is all about to make sure that government do have the cash. So when there's an obligation, I need to pay. If you can't do that, then you end up with cash rationing. And cash rationing is you can only pay when you have the money. So there's a lot of coordination, interaction that needs to play here a role for you to be able to have the money to pay your obligation. So cash is a real value. I've got $5 in my hand here. I can do something with it. Similar with government. How do I get this cash? And how can I manage it in such a way that I can save costs? Because at the end of the day, everything starts with cash. And if you do it efficiently, you will save so many costs in your operations. Idle cash in the system. I borrow money that I don't need but there's accounts that still have money in the accounts. How can I pool that money so that I don't need to borrow? So I can link my borrowing strategy according to my cash needs. I can sort of make sure that I have enough cash when I need to pay. But the problem is that there's so many complexities in the system, and because cash management is something new, and something that people don't understand, and it makes and there's a lot of change management that you need to manage in the process, because all of a sudden, what you find is that now a function will move, and certain functionalities will move to an entity, and it's going to take away some functions from me, and I will feel very upset because now I don't have the sort of the empire that I built for myself. I don't have that anymore because some of my functionalities move. But at the end of the day, the thing that I want to emphasize here is everything starts with cash. You don't have cash, you can't do anything. And link it up with then debt, and then make sure that you only borrow when you actually need the cash. So, and because of that, I think it will bring many efficiency. I'm going to do a presentation tomorrow when I will talk more broadly about this. But at the end of the day, cash is king. And that is what we should start realizing, that we're focusing on how to get cash in the most cost-effective way. And that will save, and once we do that, we bring many, many efficiencies to the system. Coordination, stakeholders, accurate data sharing, and that is what we want at the end of the day. And it starts with cash. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, merci beaucoup. Je pense que c'est très clair. Tout commence par la liquidité. Je pense aussi tout finit par la liquidité. Donc, je pense que la leçon à tirer, c'est vraiment de tenir compte, quelle que soit donc la situation, la capacité en fait à honorer ses obligations. Et dans cette capacité à honorer les obligations, il y a un élément clé qui est là. Il faut disposer donc de la liquidité nécessaire. Donc, je pense que ce que le professeur a essayé de nous faire comprendre, dans toute la dynamique en fait, de gestion de la dette, il faut garder en tête le fait de disposer à tout moment par rapport à ses obligations des ressources liquides nécessaires pour honorer ses obligations. Merci beaucoup. Merci pour ces éléments de réponse. Je vais maintenant passer à professeur Abdurrahman Manko. J'ai une question qui porte sur les DMO, donc les structures de gestion de la dette. Et la question est la suivante. Selon vous, quels sont les éléments clés, donc les éléments clés d'une structure efficace d'office de gestion de la dette publique? Et comment équilibrer donc les différents éléments, notamment la rentabilité, la gestion du risque, l'accès au marché et la transparence? Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Now, in terms of the type of configuration that helps us to achieve an effective and best practice debt management organization, we will borrow a lot from the presentation that Joan Pradeli made earlier, the keynote presentation. Essentially, the best practice is to configure the debt management office in terms of 3 blocks: the front office, the middle office, and the back office. The essence of this configuration is to ensure that there is, 1, proficiency and efficiency that derive from the simple concept of division of labor, because there is focus of responsibility of each of these blocks on specific aspects of the public debt management function. It helps for efficiency, proficiency, and professionalism to be achieved. The second advantage of that configuration lies in the need to put checks and balances in terms of the 3 blocks of functions. The front office usually focuses on prospecting for, assessing, negotiating, and procuring debt, while the middle office focuses on developing the policy framework, the strategy, as well as the risk management framework, under which such borrowing would be allowed. On the third area, the back office focuses on what you can generally call accounting aspect of public debt management. The recording, the reporting, and more importantly, the settlement of the obligations, debt service payments. So the essence of those three blocks, front, middle, and back office, is that those responsible for procurement as the bottom line of the activities are not responsible for making the rules and drawing the guidelines to ensure that the borough in itself, the procurement, has followed due process. On the other hand, both the front and middle office also need to be separated from the back office that is responsible for keeping the records, for making reports, and more importantly, as I said earlier, for carrying out debt settlements based on the obligations that have been incurred by the front office. So two major advantages of that configuration: development of proficiency and efficiency that arise from the simple concept of the division of labor, and then the need to have checks and balances which transmit to transparency, accountability, and good governance in public debt management. Based on that three-office configuration, it is typical for public debt management to be organized in three departments. For the front office, you have the portfolio management department, or any other, corresponding nomenclature. For the middle office, you would have the policy, strategy and risk management department. And for the back office, you have the debt recording and settlements department. So typically and generically, you will have three departments, core departments in any debt management organization. However, you will appreciate that there is a non-core department, but that is also very critical. That is the organizational resourcing department, responsible for human resources, general administration, and the ICT services. But we are talking of the three block core offices that make up the real function of public debt management. Now, this is the universal configuration. But depending on the level of development of each country, and also depending on the political fiscal configuration of that country, there may be other departments that belong to this front middle office, even though there are three offices, front, middle, back office. But when it comes to departmentalization, there might be more than three. For example, a country that practices fiscal federalism, a country that is a federation, and I'm sure some of the transition states here practice federalism. That is beyond the central government. They also have strong subnational governments that have adequate fiscal authorities. For such countries, they need to bother not just about the public debt of the center, but also the debt of the subnationals. To that extent, the debt management office organization at the center should be concerned about what happens at the subnational level. To that extent, it might have need to appropriately have a department that is responsible for the affairs of the subnational debt management agencies, so that there be proper coordination, and more importantly, so that there could be proper democratization of public debt management knowledge and practices. In addition, as Pradeli mentioned in his comment a while ago, when we talk about good debt, it gets the strength from two sides. One is from the productivity of what you have borrowed. But as he mentioned rightly, the second aspect of debt sustainability will arise from your capacity to have a market that quickly responds to the demands of debt by government, which means if government wants to refinance existing debt, at least part of it, it need not refinance or it need not pay back existing debt from revenue. It needs to, but not completely 100%. So if there's need occasionally for it to refinance instead of repaying, then it should have access to funds from the market. So also there might be need for it to borrow rapidly from the market for new projects. What it implies then, particularly for transition countries, is that you have to be thinking ahead in terms of having, in particular, a domestic debt market that can assist government to have ready investor base for its refinancing and to contribute to their sustainability. Now, again, to be able to do this, you might be constrained, you might find it necessary to have an additional department, market development department, or whatever nomenclature, which is responsible for focusing on making sure that this market is developed. And the development of the domestic market, of course, is a very big area because it goes beyond government agencies. It also links to the private sector capital market and money markets, because there are great players when it comes to being able to mobilize funds from the market. So I think that's where I will leave it for now. Thank you.
Now, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. I think this is very clear. We talk about the structure, we talk about what can be the most important aspect, efficiency, and the fact that countries are different. Donc, it's also important to be able to take in consideration the specific situation of the country and to adapt the structure. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I will end on your last point on local financial market. And I would like to maybe ask all of the panelists in 1 to 2 minutes to give your perspective on how countries in transition who are facing serious capacity in terms of mobilizing resources in financial market, for what could be your main recommendation for them to go through these challenges? Yeah, Professor.
Okay, thank you very much. I would say that we should, from Ghana's experience, and I want to be very practical here, we should be careful when we develop a domestic debt market. In fact, government bonds and bills were being held by the central bank. In 2014, we put it on the stock exchange, and it became liquid, both in terms of refinancing, in terms of rollovers, and rollover refinancing and others. But we supported it with what we call the sinking fund, because you do not want to be rolling over all the time. Of course, we all know about rollover risk. The market developed, it became the largest fixed income market within a matter of 3 years. But the bad experience is that if you keep rolling over, as we did, and you do not pay off, which is the difficulty we have. As part of Ghana's debt restructuring today, pension funds, individuals and others banks that invested have had to suffer a haircut because of the ineffective management of the market. The consequence is confidence in that market, confidence in whether if we go over the difficulties we are facing today, you would have even citizens and non-residents. We talk about diaspora. A lot of diaspora with funds they were transmitting were investing in that market. So it all boils down to effective debt management, even when you create that market, and it's becoming solid. That's what I have to contribute.
No, thank you very much. Thank you. Professor Mamko. Yeah, Professor Mamko. Yeah.
I think what Honorable Teta has said is certainly valid. Of course, for any opportunity you want to exploit in an economy or in a market, there have to be risks which you have to manage at the same time. But the critical thing to know is that having a market where you can always access money, even external in the external front is very critical for every modern economy. Every modern economy lives on leveraging. I'm not aware of any economy in the world today that does not borrow. Even China, that some of our countries borrow from, also borrows from the World Bank Group. And if you look at the leverage ratios, we found out that Africa's debt GDP ratio is actually much less than the debt GDP ratio of most advanced economies, which means it's not really an issue of debt GDP ratio. Those are things to put into consideration, and that relates to what the Honorable was talking about. It depends on the efficiency. And of course, we have to be careful to appreciate that on the issue of sustainability, the debt GDP ratio is based on an assumption. And that assumption is that the bigger your GDP, the bigger your public revenue. So that assumes that you have an effective tax collection system, effective revenue mobilization system. And therefore, there is a direct or proportional relationship between your GDP and your public revenue. But for most African countries, including the countries in transition, your debt GDP ratio might be good, but your debt service ratio may be very, very poor. And that reflects what happens with your revenue generation. Okay. So that's one point. The other point is to say overall, the issue of debt sustainability in Africa has more to do with governance, with political leadership, with how budgets are managed, how efficiently, how much of the money is lost in the process midway, essentially productivity of debt. And much of the problem of productivity of debt in Africa, I'm sure most of us are conversant with it, have to do with the issues of leakages and the poor accountability. And that's not restricted to debt. That's why under certain circumstances, the advice of a debt manager or any financial expert is that, look, if you cannot manage your revenue well, you cannot manage your debt well. If a country cannot manage its revenue from its own resources, from mineral resources, from agricultural exports well, then you have to be very careful. The country is very much unlikely to manage borrowed funds well. That should also be a general guide. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Thank you. Professor Kimo?
I just want to emphasize one thing. And debt managers, you have a lot of power, and you don't realize that. You have a say. You have a say in the budget. So I always say, do we have a debt problem, or do we have a fiscal problem? So what is my voice where the budget is formalized, and how much can I afford to borrow? So then secondly, it's how do we, I still think that African countries are paying too much for their borrowing. And how can we reduce cost? So cost, that risk spread, it means that they perceive your country as a risk. And is it then is it just a perception, or is it there is some truth in that? So to reduce cost is still something that we can control, because there's still value in predictability, transparency, accountability, and good policies and practices. So once you get your house in order, guess what will happen? Your cost will come down. And once you communicate to the investors, you have a proper communication strategy, guess what will happen? Your costs will come down. So there's things that's in our power that we can reduce costs, and that, I think, is the first thing that we need to focusing on How can we? I mean, Japan borrow at 1%, 2%. Germany, there was a stage that there was zero interest rates, and Africa still borrows at 18, 19, 20%, 25%. So something needs to be done here. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. I will come back in my conclusion on this point for me is very important on the perception of risk. Thank you. And now we can maybe have a final word from our expert, Mr. Pradeli, before coming back to the audience.
Thank you, Olaya. Well, I would like to say that governments should have a clear understanding of why they want to develop domestic debt markets, that is, markets for the trading of government securities. Because there are many reasons why these markets could be useful, but these reasons vary across characteristics of the country. I would think of three functions of the government debt markets that need to be considered. First, markets to finance the government. Markets whereby the government can borrow funds, and in particular, funds in local currency. Second, government debt markets offer the private sector a financial asset, a claim on the government, and that asset could be a way to maintain wealth, to save by households or by companies. So together with the funding to the government, there is a value in the government securities for the private sector that is investing in those securities. And finally, the government debt markets, as we know from empirical experience, facilitates the development of private sector financial markets. Governments, actually, even in history, were the first borrowers accessing financing. The first banks were created essentially to finance governments. So governments can introduce financial instruments, can establish regulation and standards that facilitates the development of financial relationships between private sector entities. Now, with these three functions of the government debt markets, a country, a small country, say an island country, Cape Verde, may not have a lot of funding available from domestic markets. In fact, if borrowing too much from these markets, it can crowd out a private investment. So a country that is small, that by definition will not have a seizable domestic debt market, should target in the market the placement of financial assets that are worth for the private sector, and the establishment of securities and practices and regulations that can foster the development of the financial sector for the private sector residents. Instead, larger countries, they can look for domestic debt markets as a source of finance. They are not going to crowd out so much, to a large extent, the private sector. And here, I think the important thing is to understand that the domestic markets can provide local currency funding. And it's important to tie the needs, the gross borrowing requirements, according to currencies, in order to adequately access different funding sources depending on the currencies that the government needs to support the budget. Parts of a capital project related to imported capital goods require foreign financing, but other parts related to domestic labor cost or the acquisition of goods and services that can be produced domestically, those do not require foreign financing. They require domestic financing in local currency. So it's important to see the funding in relation to the currencies. And finally, by domestic debt markets, we might also consider the possibility of giving non-residents, to giving foreigners the possibility to trade in local markets, and take them, and so they take the currency risk implicit in bringing foreign currencies, converting it into local currency at the central bank, and then, or at the FX market, and then lending or providing financing to the government in local currency. So by domestic debt markets, we have to also consider the possibility of opening it to non-residents. And this is, again, important for the first type of small economies that I refer. One way you can develop the domestic financial market without crowding out financing for residents is to allowing non-residents to participate in that market. And therefore, by domestic, you refer to not the residency of the government financiers, but instead the currencies in which the financing is provided. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Voilà, merci beaucoup. Je pense qu'il y a beaucoup de choses intéressantes qui ont été dites. Pour peut-être l'intérêt du temps, je ne vais pas revenir tous les éléments pour donner la possibilité donc, à nos collègues ici présents de poser les questions. Mais je pense qu'il y a un élément important à signaler. L'importance d'avoir un marché local, je pense que tout le monde l'a confirmé. On a aujourd'hui des pays qui dépendent beaucoup des financements extérieurs, donc la conséquence de la volatilité donc, des devises étrangères, la perception des risques. Donc il y a tellement d'éléments qui jouent sur nos pays qui ne dépendent pas d'eux, donc il est important de développer un marché financier local. Mais je pense que ça a été dit, le simple fait de développer n'est pas suffisant, il faut être très très prudent, ça peut avoir des conséquences fâcheuses, et je pense que le professeur l'a dit, un exemple du Ghana, ça peut avoir un impact sur le marché local si toutes les conditions notamment de gouvernance ne sont pas remplies. Et donc il est important de prendre les mesures donc, de prudentielles nécessaires pour on veut développer un marché local et la question de la gouvernance en général de ce marché, mais de la gouvernance en général de la gestion des finances publiques sont des éléments importants pour la crédibilité du marché et la crédibilité de la gestion donc, de la dette. Je vais m'arrêter là. Je pense que, comme je l'ai dit, il y a beaucoup d'éléments importants. Je vais peut-être laisser la possibilité maintenant au public de poser des questions à nos panélistes. Donc, si vous pouvez être succinct, une question maximum, mais peut-être en 1 ou 2 minutes. Sorry? The English translation is not working. I'm sorry. I was just saying that I hope that the French, from English to French, is coming. Okay, we are going to open the discussion to the public. I would like to propose maximum 1 question per person and 1 to 2 minutes to our panelists. Donc, just quickly, the floor is open. Yes, I want, yeah. Can we have a mic? Yeah, please present yourself, your country, and 1 question maximum. Thank you. Yeah, mic is working.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Henri, délégation de Madagascar. En fait, j'ai 2 questions. D'abord, par rapport au... Pourquoi on dit que ce sont des pays en transition? Et deuxième question, par rapport aux propositions d'organisation du système en gestion de la dette, étant donné qu'il faut vraiment voir la productivité des emprunts effectués par l'État, le mécanisme de suivi et évaluation des dettes extérieures est primordial. Où est-ce que se trouve donc ce mécanisme de gestion de la dette par rapport aux 3 structures, le front, le mid et le back office? Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Prochaine question? Yes, here. Okay, and after, yeah, yes, here. Mike? Yeah, the second row here.
Thank you very much. Justin Joseph Marona. I'm a chair of public accounts in South Sudan Parliament. I want to thank all the panelists for this eloquent interjection. So my question will be a cross-cutting question. Dr. Abraham and the rest emphasize element of governance. And I have picked interest in the element of governance is the core issue that is facing the fragile states, if you like, in order not really to manage their debts or to advance their public finance management. Now, my question is, how the African Development Bank or the Institute can influence decision of the leadership in fragile states in order for them to develop a political will so that these finances or the debt management can be practically realized. Because even this cash management, for you, the small director in the cash management can be influenced by a decision maker who is a politician, who does not have a political will to make a reform. Then here, you be rendered just powerless to make any change. So I think this is the core issue. How are we going to take this issue on the table of the leaders of the African Union so that they can benefit from those who graduate from the fragile situation? And number two, can this institute do a favor of bringing the leaders at the level of leaders or ministers, leaders, to educate the others how intelligently, how they graduate and how they inject the political will in order to improve their economy and an institution in their country. By doing so, I think we can start to see some countries in these fragile countries will start to graduate for those who really can embrace the trajectory of reform in public finance management. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think the gentleman in the 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
Yes. Mike.
Merci beaucoup. Merci de me donner la parole. Je suis Moussa Nombo, membre donc du Parlement burkinabé, président de la Commission des finances et du budget. Et effectivement, les questions ont été très bien adressées. Mais vous avez abordé la question de la spécificité des différents pays. Et à ce propos, je voudrais effectivement que les panélistes puissent effectivement aborder ces différentes spécificités. Et pour ce qui concerne mon pays, qui fait face depuis, comme les pays sahéliens, l'ensemble des pays sahéliens, à des crises que nous savons tous, des crises de terrorisme, de groupes armés terroristes, ils sont parfois suffisamment plus armés que des États organisés, ce qui oblige naturellement tous les États concernés à prendre les dispositions les plus efficaces pour faire face à des questions existentielles. Naturellement, les finances publiques en pâtissent. Il faut trouver suffisamment d'argent pour faire face à ces nouvelles crises et on peut comprendre qu'il y ait des défis immenses par rapport à la gestion donc, de la dette. Et donc devant de telles situations qui sont a priori conjoncturelles, mais qui peuvent s'étaler sur des temps bien plus longs, on peut se demander comment il faut gérer les finances publiques, comment il faut faire face à la question de la dette.
Merci.
Voilà peut-être pour me résumer.
Merci. Yeah, I will take one question, we will respond, and maybe we will come back if time allows to us.
Ok, bonjour.
Thank you. Thank you.
Je ne vous ai pas encore donné la parole.
Oui.
Ok, allez-y, et puis après je...
Ok, bonjour à tous. Merci à tous les présentateurs pour la qualité de la présentation. Moi, c'est Moussa Diaré, je viens de la République de Guinée. Je suis à la division recherche et financement, à la direction nationale de la dette. Je voudrais poser peut-être une question à M. Pradeli par rapport aux sources de financement. Il avait parlé des sources multilatérales, bilatérales, notamment, c'est-à-dire les ressources concessionnelles, c'est-à-dire les ressources concessionnelles que les États peuvent mobiliser pour financer les projets de développement. Je voudrais savoir, c'est-à-dire dans un contexte de rareté des ressources concessionnelles pour financer le développement, c'est-à-dire qu'est-ce que les États peuvent faire pour faire face à leurs contraintes de développement, sans oublier, bien évidemment, c'est-à-dire les propositions financières venant, c'est-à-dire du secteur privé ou en tout cas des promoteurs privés qui proposent des conditions du marché, très souvent. Et qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire pour, en tout cas, faire un arbitrage entre ces financements, c'est-à-dire commerciaux, et les ressources concessionnelles qui se font rares sur le marché, et pour ne pas, effectivement, c'est-à-dire trop utiliser le marché intérieur, pour ne pas aussi provoquer, parce que utiliser souvent le marché intérieur, ça peut dévier, par exemple, les banques à faire face au crédit. Voilà. Donc, ma deuxième question...
en une minute.
D'accord, en une minute. Concerne c'est-à-dire la quatrième partie de votre intervention, la gestion du personnel du bureau de la dette. C'est-à-dire, vous avez parlé de la rotation du personnel, du sous-effectif. Qu'est-ce que la BAD peut faire pour améliorer le traitement, par exemple, du personnel en charge de la gestion de la dette, vu que les gouvernements sont généralement réticents à les accompagner, à améliorer leur traitement salarial, parce qu'ils se disent qu'ils sont de la fonction publique, les autres aussi, ainsi de suite. Donc, qu'est-ce que vous proposez par rapport à ça? Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Je propose qu'on réponde... je vais prendre honorable comme dernière question et puis après on va répondre à ces questions, avec la permission des membres du jury.
Merci. Moi, c'est Adélie. Je suis le président de la commission finance au Parlement de transition du Tchad. Alors, je voudrais d'abord remercier la BAD et l'Institut africain pour le développement pour avoir organisé cette rencontre, cet atelier qui est extrêmement important. Et le thème choisi était un thème aussi d'actualité, qui est celui de la gestion de la dette publique. Alors, j'ai bien écouté les deux présentateurs et les panélistes. Ils ont abordé des questions et apporté aussi des réponses satisfaisantes. Mais je voudrais juste revenir sur une question qui est celui de la volonté politique des dirigeants des pays qui sollicitent de la dette publique. Alors, est-ce que les banques, en fait, les prêteurs, ceux qui prêtent ces dettes-là, posent suffisamment des critères contraignants pour que cette volonté politique-là adhère à la bonne gestion de la dette publique. C'était ça ma préoccupation. Merci.
Okay. No, thank you very much again. Thank you. I'm sorry if we didn't take all vacation. I will go maybe through the panel based on question. I think we are question on monitoring evaluation. The classification on fragile state, I will respond to that at the end. I think it's more on development partner who is categorized countries. And from South Sudan, it's really the issue of importance of good governance in general on those questions. And from Burkina Faso, I think specificity of country, but also the issue linked to, I say, military expensive and how to tackle the issue of terrorism and linked to the current situation of debt. Guinea-specific question to the presenter, I think, is clear. I will not come back to that. Political will is coming again, and I think is linked to also governance issue. Donc maybe, I don't know who will like to take the floor. Maybe I will ask if, Honorable, if you can start, we can go this way to respond to the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me take the governance issues. If you take the Public Financial Management Acts, the laws that are being passed now, parliaments have a very significant role, to play. In the case of Ghana, it's even in the Constitution that the government or the executive cannot borrow without Parliament approving the terms and conditions of the loan. And that is an opportunity for the Finance Committee in particular to ask questions and raise questions. The second element is that those same reports also make it mandatory for the executive to present to Parliament the loan reports. In the case of Ghana, the loan report is supposed to be compiled and actually published. The short answer is it's no panacea. Otherwise, Ghana wouldn't be defaulting. And many countries that have defaulted have seen some of these provisions. I think for me, for two elements, is to elevate the discussions on public financial management to the level of cabinet, to the level of MPs, in order that they are part of the process of seeing the dangers, that come with borrowing without rolling and just rolling over and not paying down so that you are within a ceiling and a floor, which is very important. And let me also caution that, and I do agree with Dr. Parelli, that within a short period of developing the domestic market, particularly the government's fixed income market, we saw an influx of non-residents. And at a point in time, Ghana's domestic debt was about 60% held by domestics. Now, is there an arbitration taking place? Because Ghana was in the external market, and you have the same, providers of the resources coming to the domestic market. And therefore, at a point, it was considered seriously to have a hybrid. I think we need to have a hybrid so that you treat the non-residents or even, diaspora who may want their money back and are bringing in forex. If they bring in forex and there's a rush on the domestic market, particularly at the time when things are tough, you may not be able to mobilize the external resources that they brought to give to the banks to pay them back in forex. So I think a hybrid where you have the domestic bond divided into domestic CD component in terms of repayment and rollovers, and the foreign components, which Yes, it's domestic, but when non-residents rush, right, the banks will need forex to create the buffers, the sources of financing, so that that part will be managed with the external debt and not be seen as a domestic debt. It doesn't make any difference for the US because the dollar is the dollar. It doesn't make any difference for Europe. But in our situation where you know very well that foreign currency is coming in and it will go out through the banks who will receive it. So how do you manage it? Is it a question of the government ring fencing the forex that is coming in and channeling into self-financing? Right. My final point is that the domestic market can be developed to the point where we were able to issue for the first time dollar bonds on the domestic market by residents who had forex sitting in banks. We didn't allow people to go to forex bureau to come and buy. But if you have dollars in the bank, and it was oversubscribed, we needed just 200. It was oversubscribed to about 600. Again, I'm coming to management because at that time we created a sinking fund, which was repaying part of our loan, right? Do you ring-fence that money into a project like Terminal 3, which was paying for itself, big commercial projects, right? And so the domestic market itself begins to become, a source of, forex, for domestic financing. And frankly, it was at 6%. At the time, we were doing 8.5 for the bond. So just because so thank you very much.
Yeah, it's working now. Thank you very much, Honorable. I think we will try to finish this session at 1, Eric. Donc, I would like maybe to give 1 to 2 minutes to each panelist who would like to intervene on the other question, starting by Professor Abdurrahman.
Thank you, sir. 3 issues. On governance, we need to emphasize there's need to escalate. And someone was asking what could African Development Bank do. In other fora, I've requested for FDB to consider the possibility, given their own limited mandate, as far as that is concerned, to have serious discussions with AU Commission, so that it is the AU Commission that will find a way of encouraging the leadership of African countries to consider fiscal responsibility more seriously. Even when you have fiscal responsibility laws and you have rules assigned to the parliament, we should all appreciate that that does not really solve the problem in the African context. That's why we emphasize the issue of responsibility. That is the word. Each African leader, executive, cabinet, or parliamentarian must have a high sense of responsibility, personal commitment to ensuring that the right things are done, funds are used well for the benefit of the country. There's no substitute for responsibility, no matter the laws and the institutions you put in place. On the issue of hot money and domestic debt market, the disadvantage, again, it boils down to the issue of debt productivity. In African context, I hope all of us appreciate that in the medium to long term, African countries must think in terms of export diversification, because foreign exchange is what you earn by exporting. So it's to look at the structure of our exports, the quantum and the mix. Is it well diversified? Are we still exporting raw commodities against manufactured products that are subject to volatilities in the international capital market? So export development is important. So much of the funds we borrow also should be directed to development of export projects. And more importantly, is to appreciate that in the use of borrowed funds, they should be well linked to the private sector. Even when government is spending its own money, it must find a way of making sure it is well linked, mainstreamed into private sector projects. So that, because it's the private sector that invariably does much of the production and the exportation of goods and services, which indirectly boosts which directly boosts the country's foreign reserves and stabilize its ability to deal with exchange rate challenges, as well as generate local revenue. That's my contribution for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Cremo.
Yeah, just short. It often happens that the laws that we have, that people not abide to those laws. So you can have the best legal framework, but why is it that when it comes to the operational, people not abiding to those laws? So I agree to that. We need to develop that strong sense of responsibility, accountability, and oversight over these policymakers, etc. Because at the end of the day, it's you can't manage debt if your macroeconomics are not stable. So it's all about stability. It makes the management of public debt very complicated if there is not stability, if you have to face crises. So the thing is that at the end of the day, one needs to see how can we hold politicians accountable. In South Africa, we had the case where our politicians were very accountable. They have done very well. And since up till, say, the new government, or when we become a democracy from 1994 to 2010, and then there was a period of where politicians didn't behave well. So recently we have elections, and guess what happened to that party that started not behaving well? We voted them out. They don't have the majority anymore. So yeah, that is one way to manage, to keep politicians accountable, but I think there's a very important message or sort of what can I say, that politicians need to understand their role, that they're not for themselves but to service people and to provide the services in the most cost-effective way. So yeah, in terms of funding, I would leave that over to John.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, Professor Prandelli. Yes, you have the floor.
I will just address the two questions that were addressed to me quickly on the risk of a government crowding out the private sector when the government attempts to create a government that domestic debt market. That risk exists, and I think that the borrowing from domestic sources should increase over time gradually. No government should, say, from 1 year to the next, try to, say, push domestic financial markets to provide 5% of GDP to the government, because that's going to be a disaster. The idea is that any good policy is a gradual policy. For expansion, for contraction, sharp variations in the patterns of government borrowing are never good, neither from domestic sources nor from external sources. And the second question was about how can governments increase the compensation of debt managers to provide them with better technical IT equipment, give them job stability, etc. Well, I think there is no reluctance from development partners to see that development. The problem is I think the more general case in which some governors want to simply increase the salaries of certain parts of the public administration without mobilizing resources, without looking into making other parts of the public administration more efficient and look for cost savings. In my own experience, I have seen, say, IMF programs that oppose pay raises because they are not accompanied by additional resources. They preserve a fiscal deficit or even increase it. But if there is an overhaul of the public finances, then I don't see any international development partner having an operational policy that would object to that measure proposed by a sovereign government. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Thank you. And let me also add maybe 1 or 2 points on political will and the role of institutions like the bank. I think it's clear in our mandate we didn't have a political governance as a mandate of the bank, but we understand that economic governance, development, we cannot do it without political will. Donc, as Professor said, we try to convince country and we work closely with African Union to improve political governance. It's really important for us. The environment on political governance is really important. But as development partner and the bank in particular, I think for us is our main goal is really how to improve efficiency of institution. And I would like to say again, Parliament, Minister of Finance, we think that we don't have power, but we have power. It's not only the politicians who have power. You allocate budget, you prepare the budget, you control the fund, and the politicians, they come, then go, and we are still here. Then we have power, we need to exert our power. And what we are doing here through this kind of, let's say, it's not training forum, it's just for us to continue to convince all of us in our role. And it's important, African Development Institute is here to continue to help country to improve I can say the efficiency of institution. And to respond to Burkina Faso, when we say improving efficiency of institution, is all institution, including defense force, even if the bank is not financing. For us, it's very clear, there is no development without security. We didn't see any country develop without security. It didn't exist. In definition of your priority, if security is priority, put a resource in security. But what we are saying also, when we are putting resources, efficiency of utilization of public resources, including military expenses, is really important. Value for money is for all budget. Donc our role as institution is continue to support country to improve the efficiency of institution. And it's what the bank as African Development Bank will continue. An institution including private sector, civil society, women, for all actors, we need to take in consideration their positive role on building the state capacity. And thank you very much for your time. I would like again to thank you very much my 4 panelists for their time, for their contribution, and I just would like to have a kind of applause for them. Thank you very much.